Welcome to lesson 200 of the Sheets for School Leaders course, where our goal is to make all of our data dynamic so we don't have to do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. I am your host and teacher, Brad Schreffler. In this lesson, we're going to be introducing some advanced math formulas. We will cover a handful of different formulas to help you organize and analyze large amounts of data in various different ways. These are the building blocks on which all of our other work within the 200 level of this course will rely. If you're new to my classes at the 200 level, then do make sure you go ahead and make a copy of the practice sheet that is linked in the information section to the side of this lesson. You can copy that practice sheet and follow along as I go through the examples and activities in this lesson today. The first formula we're going to talk about is the count formula. The count formula will tell you how many values in a range are numeric or numbers. This can be helpful when we are looking at form response data, for example. All you give to the count formula is a range, and it will return the result. So let's go ahead to our practice sheet and see it in action. On our practice sheet, we have our front page of examples, but we're going to go to the Form Responses tab first to start. Here we have an example of some form responses. This one is a sign-in sheet for students who have come to a resource center on campus, and it shows us when they checked in, what they were there for, and how long they were in the room. If I wanted to know the total number of visits, so that's going to be our first example where we're going to use the count formula. We're going to go right here for total number of visits, and we're going to count how many visits total. So we'll start with equals count and then open parentheses. And then on our form responses tab, we'll notice that the ID numbers are always numbers. So we're going to go ahead and just select that column, form responses B, and then close the parentheses and hit enter. So I have 193 of those values total that are numbers. Now, what if we wanted to break that down? So if we wanted to look at the form responses tab, column E, you can see when they checked in, but you'll also notice that sometimes it says lunch or after school. So what if I wanted to know the periods that had visits, just the number of visits that occurred during a class period? So we'll do that formula again, equals count, open parentheses, and then we're going to select the period column and then close that parentheses. Notice that our number has gone down. So instead of 193 total visits, 142 of those were in a class period because it did not count the lunch options and the after school options. It only counted those that were numbers. So what if that's not enough? I don't want total numbers. I want to break it down even more. Well, that's where our next formulas will come in. Our next new formula for today is the COUNTIF formula. The COUNTIF formula looks through a range of values and meets a specific criteria. So just like the count, it'll look through it all, but instead of checking to see if it's numbers, it'll check to see if it meets the criteria. That criteria can be text, numbers, logical operators. It can also be a cell reference that contains one of those values. So that's just going to count through that range to see where it meets that criteria. We also have the COUNTIFs formula. This is very much the same, except you can repeat the number of ranges and number of criteria as many times as you want. So it can meet 2, 3, 4, 50 different criteria, and it'll count the values in that range that meet all of those things. So let's go back to our practice sheet and see these two in use. So here on total visits, we're going to go ahead and start with this one. We're going to start with 12th graders. How many total visits are occurring for 12th graders? All right. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and type equals COUNTIF. We're going to pick the range of the grade level range here. And we don't want that to move around later, so we'll just go ahead and hit F4. That'll automatically add those dollar signs so it doesn't move around. And then add a comma. And we'll go over to example 1. And we're going to select on this 12 right here so that that's set up. Close that parentheses and hit enter. So now it's counted the number of times that column D has 12s. How many times did a senior come to visit this room? And then we can, of course, drag that on over. And that reference just moves over which column it's looking at. It's looking at 11, 10, and 9. And that tells us our total number of visits broken down by grade level. What if I wanted to know that same value, total number of seniors, but I only want to know if they were in a class period visit? I don't want to hear the before school and after school. I only want class period visits. So for that, we're going to go ahead and use the COUNTIFs formula. So we'll equal COUNTIFs. The criteria at first is going to be very much the same. We're going to say form responses D. We're going to lock that on in. We'll add a comma, and then we're going to select on that 12. Add a comma again, and now we're going to go to form responses column E. We don't want that to move again. And here, in order to make sure it's a number, we're going to go ahead and put a comma, and then in quotation marks, put greater than 0. That will make sure it's only if it's a number. It'll ignore text values in its count. So we're going to do greater than 0. Notice when I'm putting a Boolean, if I'm doing a true-false statement or a test of a value, that does go in quotation marks here. Close the parentheses and hit enter. And we'll see we had 59 seniors visit the Resource Center. And again, drag that on over, and we will see all the other values for each grade level and how they came. So now I know where we're at. The next few formulas we're going to run through are similar to COUNTIF and COUNTIFs formulas. The first are the SUMIF and SUMIFs. You'll notice that the format for these formulas is the same as the COUNTIF and COUNTIFs. The difference being that this will add together the values that meet the criteria in the range. So instead of just counting them, it will add them together. We also can use the average if and average ifs formulas. As you might imagine, this does very much the same thing, but it averages the values in the given ranges with the given criteria. Notice that in both of these formulas, there is, on the average ifs formula, the range to average, and on average if at the end is an optional range to average that we can add on. So let's go ahead and see that in context. So if I wanted to do the total number of minutes in a class period that students are down there, maybe look at it as the number of minutes they've lost being down here. We're going to do equals SUMIF, open that parentheses. Our criteria range is first, so our criteria range is column E, and we want to know where it's greater than 0, closing that. And then our next option is the sum range, the values we want to add up, and that's optional. So in this case, if we don't add a sum range, it's just going to add up the period numbers, which doesn't really give us anything useful. So instead, we're going to go ahead and add a comma and add our sum range being the column F. Close those parentheses and hit enter. Now I see that there's been 3,800 minutes of class time spent by students down in the Resource Center. If I wanted to know just the total number of seniors class time, again, seniors class time, now we're going to do equals SUMIFs. You'll notice here, the range to add is no longer optional. We have to have a range to add on SUMIFs. So in this case, it's going to be column F. Because we're going to be dragging this one around, we're going to hit that F4 so that doesn't move. And now we're going to do a combo of criteria range and criteria as many times as we need to. So first we'll make sure it's during a class period. So our first criteria range is column E. Again, lock that column in with F4. It's greater than 0 is what we're looking for, so we know it's a number. Add a comma again, and here we have D. Again, lock that column in. We don't want that grade level to move. And let's add a comma, and back on example 1, we'll click on 12. Close that parentheses and hit enter. So now I have 1,536 minutes for seniors. If I drag those on over, I have my total number of minutes for all 4 grade levels. Average if is going to function very much the same. So we'll go ahead and click average if. Our criteria range, so we're doing class visit minutes, average length of time they're in there. Our criteria range is still column E. It is if it is greater than 0, so it's a class period. And then it is for our average range, again, optional on an average if, then it's column F. So average visit is 27 minutes. Students lose an average of 27 minutes when they come down. And then again, we'll use average ifs to figure it out by grade level. Average ifs, open parentheses. Our average range is the minutes in the room. We're going to lock that in with F4. We want to make sure that the visit is during a class period, so that's column E. Lock that in with F4. Greater than 0 is how we make sure it's a number, like before. Add a comma. And then column D, use F4 to lock that in, comma, and lock it up with the 12 right here. Average for seniors is 26 minutes, and then drag it on over, and we see it's about the same. Time for some practice. If you've completed any of my other lessons, you know how this works, but if you're new, let me go through it. I'm going to give you a task to try and tell you to pause the video. After about 5 seconds, I will give you a clue in case you are struggling. Again, since you will have paused before the clue, you have more than 5 seconds to get the formula, so do not feel rushed. Take your time and try to figure it out. This activity, I'm giving you 3 hints. So if you get it without any of the extra clues, you can jump forward about 15 or 20 seconds in the video to continue on and see if your solution is correct. Your practice for this lesson is to complete the table on the practice tab such that when you write the formula, you can paste it into all the other cells to complete the table. So you're only writing it once and being able to paste it into all the other cells in that table to be able to complete it. Pause to practice. How are we doing? Do we figure it out? All right. Here's a clue, your first clue. You are writing a formula that will find an average when multiple criteria are met. Pause to practice. Almost there? Need another clue. All right. The criteria for the formula will need to be cell references in order for this to work. Pause to practice. Almost there? All right. So that part's pretty straightforward so far, but the real trick of this formula is where you do and don't lock in rows and columns with the dollar sign. Pause to practice. Did you get it? Did you solve it? All right, let's take a look and see how you did. So on our practice tab, we have this table right here. You probably already figured out we're going to be using an average ifs formula. So we're going to start with just typing average ifs in B3. That's going to be our starting point. Our average range, since we're looking for length of time, is going to be minutes in room. And no matter where we move this up, down, left, and right, we don't want that column to change. Minutes is always going to stay in column F, so F4 to just lock that on in. Now, looking back at our practice tab, our first criteria is if they are in first period. Let's start with the period first. So if it's in first period, then we're going to make that. So we'll go to form responses, and we'll go to our period. Again, F4, lock that in. And then here's where this gets interesting. So we're going to select on first period because we want to leave that. Now, if I drag this column to the right, if I copy it down to the right, it's going to shift over to each of those other values. It'll change it to 2, 3, 4, lunch, etc., all the way through, which I want. I want that to change if I drag to the right. But what I don't want is it to change if I drag down, because when I drag down the formula, if I move this down here, for example, the copied formula will look at the number in B3, which is going to be a count or an average and is not going to find anything. So we don't want that. So instead, we're going to lock in that 2 because I don't want it to move when I go down. We put the dollar sign on the 2. That's going to mean that as I drag to the right, the B will increment to a C, D, E, F, G, but the 2 will stay 2 as I drag it down. All right, that's only the first criteria. Now we also want to know if they are, what the reason they're there for. So in this case, general information is our example. So let's go to form responses. Here's our reasons for visit in column C. I don't want that to move around as I change anything, so we're going to lock that one in, add a comma, click on A3. Here, we want the opposite. When I drag to the right, I don't want that A to change. I want that A to stay where it is, but when I drag down, I need this to go down with me. So we're going to go ahead and put that dollar sign on the A right there. Now we will go ahead and close those parentheses and hit enter. Have my value of 9. And then if I copy this value right here, select this whole thing and hit paste, my entire formula is filled out and we're good to go. Simplify things a little bit. We'll reduce the number of decimal places. There we go. We have a couple that don't have any values. Nobody was there for general information after school, so we got some zeros there. In future lessons, we'll talk about how to make those errors go away. But for now, that is our answer. Well, that concludes lesson 200. With this information in your repertoire, you are ready to take on the next level and really boost your skills with sheets. As always, thank you for allowing me to show you how to take your Sheets game to the next level with my Sheets for School Leaders course. If you found this lesson helpful, check out bradschreffler.com for my full selection of courses. All 100 level courses are free, so try them out and see if they're for you. And if you do find value in them, consider sharing to your coworkers, friends, and the smartest cat person you know. Have a great day, and remember, the goal is to never do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. Welcome to lesson 201 of the Sheets for School Leaders course, where our goal is to make all of our data dynamic so we don't have to do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. I'm your host and teacher, Brad Schruffler. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about a couple of different ways to move and manage data between different sheets in dynamic ways. Now, this is the first lesson of the Level 200 course, so I just want to point out that at this point, hopefully you've already completed my 100 level courses and have a basic understanding of the ways to use Google Sheets, simple formula, notation, and syntax. Some of those things I'm just going to be assuming you know them going forward beyond this. If you haven't, do go ahead and check out my level 100 level, and that will give you an idea of how to do some of the basics in Google Sheets. As usual, to get started with this lesson, make sure you have a copy of the practice sheet that will be linked below and follow along with the examples as you watch this video lesson. The link can be found in the information section for this lesson below. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about a couple different ways to move and manage data between different sheets in a dynamic ways. As usual, make sure you have a copy of the practice sheet for this lesson and follow along with the examples while you watch this video. The link can be found in the information section for this lesson. The first formula we're going to talk about is the filter formula. If you've been through my classes, you know the goal is to never have to do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. And the filter formula is a great way that will help us directly accomplish this goal. Let's start with the why we would want to use the filter formula. Let's go to our practice sheet. Let's start with why we want to use this formula. On the practice sheet, look at the data table, this tab right here that says data table. This is a list of data. Let's imagine that my counselors gave me some information or I pulled this out of my student information system. Now I want to be from this list to find only my seniors. So if I want to, I can go ahead and click this little filter icon at the top, and I can go to grade level and filter out to only show 12th. So now I have just my seniors in this list. Now, let's imagine this list gets updated. Maybe more students are added. Maybe data inside the list changed. Whatever the reason they were on this list, some kids come off, some kids get removed. Now, if I do that, I'd have to rerun this filter again because as data changes, my filters get reset and I have to do it over again. That's the thing we never want to do twice. So instead, we're going to play with the actual filter function. So let's go ahead and remove that filter real quick. The filter function is pretty straightforward. So obviously it is just called filter. The first thing you're going to find is the range that you want to have returned back. So maybe I want to pull columns A through C so that it will now return back columns A through C. After that are the conditions for what I want to be true in order to give me that value back. So that would be where I would say grade level equals 12, for example, and that would be how I filter it. Let's go ahead and look at this in practice. Go back to our practice sheet and let's go to sample 1. Let's go to the example 1 tab under Google Sheet. We're going to start by typing equals filter, like any other formula. The first thing that we're going to return is the range. So in this case, let's go ahead and say we want to pull columns A through H from the data table sheet. We're just going to pull them all from data table right there. Select all those, so now it says A through H. Then we'll put a comma. And in this case, we're going to do like we did in our previous sample. We're going to go ahead and just pull 12th graders. So I'll go ahead and select data table D through D, column D, and just type equals 12. Close that parenthesis and then hit enter. Now you'll see this list has all of the seniors out of that other list. So we don't have to worry about going through and filtering over and over again. I have it all right here ready to go with just those seniors. The nice thing about the filter formula is we can use multiple conditions that have to be met as well. We don't have to do just one, we can do multiples. So let's say, for example, I don't just want the 12th graders, but I want all the 12th graders that have above a 2.5 GPA or a 2.5 GPA. So for this same formula, we'll just go ahead and delete that parentheses, add a comma, and we'll say all of those that the GPA, that column G, is greater than 2.5. And then close the parentheses and hit enter. And now you'll notice that list shortened out. It's only those students with above a 2.5. Now this gives us a great opportunity to show you why this is so useful. Like I said, imagine this table, this data table is regularly updated information. We need to be able to update this regularly. So let's look at Mr. Ford here. Mr. Ford, for example, has gone ahead and completed some credit recovery and made up some grades. So his GPA has gone up. He's moved his GPA up to a 2.506. Well, now he should be included in our list. So when that 2.506 is moved, then on our example page, Mr. Ford has been added onto that list automatically. Where he was not there before, he's now the top name on our list. So now we have an automatically updating, live updating data table. Again, we don't have to go through and filter. We don't have to add him onto the other list, wherever it may be. All of these things update live, and we are now in a position of doing dynamic data, which is the goal of this whole course. The next formula we're going to look at is the indirect formula. This is a very simple formula with so many potential applications. When we are trying to make sure we never do the same thing twice with our data, we have to consider that the raw report is not the right place for us to write our formulas and calculations. Let me show you what I mean. Looking at our All Students tab on this sheet, we see a ton of information, right? This is a raw report pulled right out of our student information system. Now, what this doesn't include is the student email address. Thinking back to our previous example in lesson 100, we went ahead and just built the student email address because it would just be, in column P, it's the student ID number. We use that ampersand, and it's at schooldistrict.com. Close it, and we're good to go. It'll even give me the option to autofill that all the way down. So now column P is all those student email addresses set and ready to go. But a month passes, new students enroll, GPAs are updated, and we need to go ahead and replace this formula. So we do a quick, we download the new version out of our student information system, and we go ahead to import it right here and upload the new report. We're going to replace it because that's the easiest way to update data. And you'll notice the report is now updated, but that column P we added where it had the email addresses is now gone. So doing our formulas here, once we update the report, we're going to lose that information, which is not what we want. So we need to figure out a better way. Let's use the indirect formula to make that happen. Indirect is really straightforward. All it is using a cell reference, which we've talked about before, as a piece of text, and then Google Sheets interpreting that text into an actual cell reference. Here's what I mean by that. Let's look at the sample. We're going to go to our example 2 tab, and we want to pull out from the All Students report columns B through E. We want to know their ID number, their name, and the student key. So we're just going to pull columns B through E out of this. Well, we talked about cell referencing before, so we're going to say equals indirect, and we're going to put it in quotation marks so that Google Sheets knows it's text, and we're just going to type all students B through E. Close both the quotation mark and the parentheses and hit enter. So now this is all that same information pulled right from that report. And if I update the raw report, this page will update automatically as well. So now when we add the email addresses, we'll do the same thing we did before. We'll equals A2, add that ampersand, and at schooldistrict.com. It'll again give me the option to copy it all the way down. And now repeating what we did before, we'll go ahead and upload the new version of the report from our computer. Place current sheet. And now when we go back to the example 2, all those information, that email address is still there because the formula is updated on this tab, not where we're updating the raw report. So we have that information ready to go. The other thing that the indirect formula can be used for is using a text or a value in another cell as what you want to use in the actual formula. So if we look at the example 3 tab, for example, you'll see that in column A1, I have an indirect formula that is just looking at column E1 for the sheet name, column E2 for the column to start with in the return, and then column E3 for what it ends with. So what it's telling it is go look at all students, columns B through C, which you'll notice is ID number and student key, exactly like it is right here. It's the same information, same order. Let's say now I decided, all right, well, I also want to go ahead and pull student last name. So I'm just going to add in column D right here. And now my formula updates and automatically adds in column D. I could even, if I wanted to, change this to a different sheet. I can say data table. And now it will pull those 3 columns from the data table sheet instead. Now, this may not seem super useful to you right now, but I can tell you that as we go forward, this is going to start to become a really, really powerful way for us to make adjustments to our sheets live and dynamically so that we're not having to go back and move things around. This is especially useful when reports are coming into you and the columns where things are can change. There's some really powerful formulas we can use later to be able to find out where those columns are instead of just assuming they're always in the same place. Very, very powerful tool. Time for some practice. If you've completed any of my other lessons, you will know how this works. I will give you a task to try and tell you when to pause the video. After 5 seconds, I will give you a clue in case you are struggling. Again, since you will have paused before the clue, you have more than 5 seconds to get the formula, so do not feel rushed. Take your time and try to figure it out. This activity, I give you 3 hints. So if you get it without the extra clues, you can jump forward about 15 seconds in the video and continue on to the correct answer. Our practice for today, in the practice tab, write a formula that will dynamically display the student ID, last and first name of 10th and 11th grade students from the data table sheet who have between a 2.0 and a 3.0 GPA. Pause for practice. All right, did you get it? No? All right, first hint. There will be a total of 4 conditions in the filter formula in order to get what you want to end up with. Pause to practice. Did we get it yet? All right, next clue. There is no way to use OR in a filter function, but you can have multiple conditions applied to the same column in order to produce a similar result. Pause to practice. How do we do? We got one left, one more clue if you haven't gotten it yet. None of the conditions in the filter formula should have an equal sign in them. Last time, pause to practice. So, how do we do? Did we come up with the answer? Let's see if you got it the way I did. The first part should be obvious. We want to get back the student ID, last name, and first name. We'll start by typing our equals filter, and we'll go ahead to this data table tab, and we want to return A through C. Now, in order to get grade levels of 10 and 11, you can't say equals 10 and then equals 11 because no case will it equal both. So instead, what we want to do is be able to use grade level column D is going to be greater than 9, and also grade level column D is less than 12. So that will give me the 2 values in between. Greater than 9, but less than 12, that's 10 and 11 are the only 2 values there. We're going to repeat that idea with the GPA. So we'll do data table column G is greater than 2 and also less than 3 because I wanted those students in between those 2 values. Close that filter, and I have my result. I have 10th and 11th graders with those 2, with that range of GPAs. Set and ready to go. So here it is up on the screen for you if you want to be able to see that a little bit larger. So we use those 2 different rules of being less than 12 and greater than 9, that gives me my grade level, and greater than 2 and less than 3 to give us that GPA range. Congratulations, you finished lesson 201, the first lesson of the level 200 course of the Sheets for School Leaders series. As always, Thank you for allowing me to show you how to take your Sheets game to the next level with the Sheets for School Leaders courses. If you found this lesson helpful, check out bradschreffler.com for my full selection of courses. All 100 level courses are free, so try them out to see if they're for you. And if you do find value in them, consider sharing to your coworkers, friends, and the next person you see wearing a hat in public. Have a great day, and remember, the goal is to never do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. Welcome to lesson 202 of the Sheets for School Leaders course, where our goal is to make all your data dynamic so you don't have to do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. I am your host and teacher, Brad Schreffler. In this lesson, we're going to talk about two formulas that will come in very, very handy as we are building dynamic sheets. They are the unique and the sort formulas. As usual, make sure you have a copy of the practice sheet for this lesson and follow along with the examples while you watch the video. The link can be found in the information section for this lesson. If your student information system or SIS is as bad as most of the ones I've seen, the exports aren't great. Even if they are, the data within your school changes regularly. Students take assessments that modify their data, new grades get entered, credits are recovered, teachers collect new information about their students, and so on and so on. When your data is not dynamic, each of these updates means all your spreadsheets and dashboards quickly fall behind and are not giving you the most complete data to help you make decisions. The solution is to have your spreadsheets work with the raw report, the raw export from whatever system you are using, and then on other tabs, modify, organize, calculate, and adjust the data. That way, when the raw report is updated, everything else is updated automatically. The trick to this is getting the data from one sheet onto another tab on the same sheet without having to use copy and paste. If we copy and paste, we have to do that again when we update our raw report, and we don't want to do the same thing twice with our data. So this is where our two formulas for this lesson come in. The first formula we're going to talk about is the unique formula. Often when we have data, especially like form data where people are making submissions over and over, we end up with a lot of duplicate data. The unique formula does the same thing as using the remove duplicates feature, except you don't have to redo it each time more data is added to the data set. The unique formula only calls for one value, a range of data. So let's go to our practice sheet and see it in action. On this practice sheet, one of the things will be Form Responses tab, which is exactly that, form responses. And it includes ID numbers, reason, and period of the visit to a counselor's office in a school. A simple sign-in form, if you will. Now, from this form, let's say we want to calculate how many visits are happening for each reason. What reason is getting the most visits down? What are my counselors spending a lot of time talking to students about? So we could copy all the reasons and type them all out. We know that there may be 3 or 5 or whatever, and type them all out and do it that way. But if new reasons get added later on, then they won't get added to my tracker of what reasons are being used. So we want to make sure that we don't have to go back and do this again later. We're going to make it dynamic, and we're going to use the unique formula. So on our example 1 tab, we're going to go right here. We're going to start our first unique formula. We do equals unique, open parentheses. And you'll see here that we ask for just a range and some optional options. We're really never going to use those optional options, so we're not going to worry about it. We're going to leave it as is right now. So we're just going to go over to form responses, and we will select the reasons right here in column C, and then close our parentheses and hit enter. So you'll see now we have the different options that are used, the different reasons people are coming down for visits. Do a simple count if formula to figure out how many times they've occurred. So we'll do count if. Our range is form responses C to C. And then we just want to count where it equals A2 and close that parentheses. Because again, that's that A2 we're looking for. And then we can just drag this down to the other 3 results. Easy enough. Now, what you'll notice about the unique formula is that it will always produce the results in the order that they appear. So here we did unique C through C, and you'll see that the first one is the reason for the visit, but then general information is first. Even though alphabetically, college application would probably come first. The reason for that, if we go back to our form responses tab, is because the first response here is general information. So it sees reason for visit, that's new. Then it sees general information, that's new. So it returns that. Then college application support, it doesn't do these because they're not new. And then it goes to trade school. That's how the unique formula works. Now, there are plenty of cases where that's not the best result. In this case would be a good one of them because general information is the first to be returned and alphabetically it's not first, nor is it the one that occurs the most often. So we'd want to adjust that in some way or another and go ahead and sort this column. That brings us to our next formula for today, the sort formula. The sort formula does ask for a few more values. It doesn't just want the one value. We do have 3 to look at here. So let's go ahead and go through them one at a time. The range is what you want to return, the range of columns that you want to give back as a result of the sort formula. What do you want to end up with? This can be just one column of data or multiple, so you can produce multiple columns of data out of this result. Whatever you select is the columns that come back from the formula. The next is the sort column, and this works exactly like a VLOOKUP index does. If you remember that option on a VLOOKUP, we counted the number of columns over from where we started to the one we wanted to return. In this case, we count from where we started to the column that we want to sort by. So if we pull just one column of data, then this is just going to be 1. If we pull 3 or 4 and we want to sort it on the second column, it would be 2. And lastly, we're gonna say whether or not we want the values to be returned ascending or descending. So if you put true for this value, then it will return smallest to largest. If you put false, then it will return largest to smallest. As usual, let's go ahead and see this in practice on our practice sheet. All right, so let's go on over to our example 2 tab and we'll go ahead and make our first sort formula. So we're going to type equals sort and open parentheses. Then we're going to come over to our example 1 page and we're going to grab A2 to B4 because that's where our actual data is for our table. And we're going to sort this by the reason for the visit alphabetically from A to Z. So in this case, that is going to be the first column. So for our column number, sort column, we type 1, then another comma. And we want it to be ascending in this case because A to Z is ascending. And so we'll type true and then close our parentheses and hit enter. So you'll see now we have college application support first because it starts with a C, and now we have alphabetical order. Now that's great, and that's useful to display it this way, but let's say we actually want to rank them. We want to know which one has the most visits and which ones have the least. So we're going to actually make a quick change. In this case, all we really have to do is change that 1 to a 2 because now we're going to sort by the second column. And instead of true, we're going to say false because we want the largest value first, the one that has the most occurrences first. And then you'll see trade school swapped places with general information. And now our counts are organized from lowest or highest to lowest. Time for some practice. If you've completed any of my other lessons, you will know how this works. I will give you a task to try and tell you to pause the video. After 5 seconds, I will give you a clue in case you are struggling. Again, since you have paused before the clue, you have more than 5 seconds to get the formula, so do not feel rushed. Take your time and try to figure it out. This activity, I give 3 hints. So if you get it without any of the extra clues, you can jump forward about 15 seconds in the video to continue on. Your practice for your lesson is to create a table that shows the number of times that a student visited each period. This table should be in order by period. Pause to practice. Ready for your first clue? Remember that you can put a formula inside of another formula. Pause to practice. Think about where you start the range and end it so you don't end up with a period on row 11. Pause to practice. Almost. We got one more. The formula for the counts column is the same format as the one from the example 1 tab. Last time, pause to practice. All right, how'd we do? Did we get the right answer? Well, let's go ahead and look at the sheet and see how we did. So right away, what we need to know is that we are going to have to do two separate formulas inside the same cell. We're going to have to do a sort and a unique. Now, technically, you could actually do this in either order you wanted. You could do the unique first or the sort first. It doesn't really matter. I personally would do the sort first and then the unique. That's the way I would write it, but it would work the other way around. So we're going to go ahead and start it this way. So we're going to go ahead and say equals sort, open parentheses, and now we're going to do our unique. So we have our unique formula set up, and since we're doing periods, we need to pull from our form responses, column D. Now, I mentioned in one of the clues, if you do this, then this period header, this header is going to get sorted in. So instead what I want to do is I want to just add a 2 onto that right there. So now Google Sheets knows start on the second row and go all the way to the bottom. That D2 through D, that's one of those nice little things we can do with Google Sheets that lets us make sure our data moves around without having to mess with our headers. Now, that unique is done. Now what will happen is that will pull out just the unique values in the order that they appear and send them to the sort formula. So now the sort formula, since I only have one column, I'm going to be sorting by the first column, which is 1. And in this case, I do want them ascending because I want first, second, third, fourth. So I want to go ahead and put true and then close my sort formula. Now I have first through 7th and then after school and lunch right there. The count part is pretty straightforward. It's the same count if that we used on example 1, just moved over a column. So we'll say equals count if. Our range is form responses D through D. And we want to count A2 for our first one. Close that parentheses. That's because A2 is right there. And then we're going to drag that on down. And there we go. Now we have our response for our practice. All right, congratulations. That concludes lesson 202 of the Sheets for School Leaders podcast. With this information in your repertoire, you are ready to take on that next level and really boost your skills in Sheets. As always, thank you for allowing me to show you how to take your Sheets game to the next level with my Sheets for School Leaders course. If you found this lesson helpful, check out bradschreffler.com for my full selection of courses. All 100 level courses are free, so try them out and see if they're for you. And if you do find the value in them, consider sharing them to your coworkers, friends, and Weird Al Yankovic if you know him. Have a great day, and remember that the goal is to never do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. Welcome to lesson 203 of the Sheets for School Leaders course, where our goal is to make all our data dynamic so we don't have to do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. I am your host and teacher, Brad Schreffler. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about a concept called arrays. Arrays, and especially inline arrays, help you work with data that isn't formatted the way you need it for your purposes, without having to copy and paste or move around columns. That kind of readjustment is things we'd have to do over and over again with raw reports, and we don't want to have to do that. As usual, make sure you have a copy of the practice sheet for this lesson and follow along with the examples while you watch this video. This link can be found in the information section for the lesson. An array is a set of data, usually rows and columns of data. The reason we use arrays in Google Sheets is to move data around to simplify other formulas when using data exported from multiple different platforms. In Google Sheets, we can build an array by using the curly brackets. These brackets tell Google Sheets that whatever is inside of them will be an array or a set of data, which will go across multiple rows and/or columns. In this array, we will select data and use a comma to start a new column and a semicolon to start a new row. So you understand what I'm talking about? Let's go to our practice sheet and I'll show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and look at Canvas Export 1 tab. And you'll see a list of data that might have been pulled from a learning management platform, such as Canvas. Canvas, for example, gives students their own unique ID number for their platform, but that doesn't match the ID number that we would use out of our district systems. So Canvas does have that ID number, but since it is just extra data on their system, it puts it at the end of all the data. So in column L, if you look at the example right here. On example 1 tab, let's use an inline array to rebuild this table so that the ID number is first and to get an idea of how the inline arrays work. To start, we're just going to go ahead and type our equal sign as usual and then our opening curly bracket. Now, on the Canvas Export 1 tab, to start, we're going to type an equal sign and an opening curly bracket. Now, on the Canvas Export 1 tab, we're going to go ahead and select the column that has the ID numbers as our district uses them, add a comma. We'll select the name of the student right here, and then we'll do another comma, and we're going to go ahead and select the scores that it gives us right here. Close that curly bracket and hit enter. And you'll see it's rebuilt that same table and put it onto this other tab. Now, let's go ahead and look at the example 2 tab. Here we have a small subset of student ID numbers, and I need to get some information about them together. To find their name, we can do a VLOOKUP formula from our All Students tab. We've learned about VLOOKUP in lesson 103. We're going to do equals VLOOKUP, and then our opening. We're going to do $A2 because we don't want that A to move when we drag this formula over. Our range is going to be in our All Students tab. We're going to grab B through E because we're going to get first name in a minute, then F4 to give that. In this case, we want to get last name first, which is 1, 2, 3. That's our third column for that index. And because we want an exact match, we'll do false and close the parentheses. Copy this over, and we'll just change that 3 to a 4 because the next column was where the first name was, and now we have it. Good to go. Now we need to get their reading score from the Canvas export. We start our VLOOKUP with, like we did before, equals VLOOKUP, $A2, and we'll go over to the Canvas Export 1 tab, and here's where we start to see why we would want the inline array, because we have a problem. Our VLOOKUP can always only get information to the right of the lookup column, or the ID number column in this case. Since that's an L, a VLOOKUP would really only be able to return information from these blank cells after that ID number, and that's not what we want. We want to be able to pull information before that. So here's where we're going to put that opening curly bracket. We're going to select column L, use a comma, and because we want the reading score, we're going to select column F. Now close that curly bracket, and then finish our VLOOKUP like we normally would. In this case, we want the second column, and we are doing an exact lookup, so we close the rest of it out like normal. And then when I hit enter, I now have that reading score thanks to our inline array. Pretty great. We can copy it down. We're good to go. It'll go ahead and build it just like normal. These inline arrays have made it so that we are not limited to having our data need to be in a specific format. And we don't have to clean up and export every time we update our data. Remember, we don't want to have to do the same things twice with our data. That's our goal of this entire course. The other thing that we can do with inline arrays is combine data from multiple duplicate tabs. For example, we will say that the first Canvas export was for one teacher, but we also have 2 others that are exported for other teachers' gradebooks. So in our example case here of example 2, if I copy this information all the way down, you're going to notice that some of these are going to find NA. That means those students are with other teachers besides the one that we're starting with. So let's go back into our formula in B2, and we're going to make an adjustment. After this second column from Canvas Export 1, F through F, we're going to add a semicolon, and then we're going to go to Canvas Export 2, select column L, a comma. We're just going to repeat this process and the reading score there. Then we're going to do it again for Canvas Export 3. We're going to select column L, a comma, and then a reading score. Now when I hit enter and we copy that formula all the way down, it will find those students no matter which of those 3 tabs they're actually on. Time for some practice. If you've completed any of my other lessons, you will know how this works. I will give you a task to try and tell you to pause the video. After 5 seconds, I will give you a clue in case you are struggling. Again, since you will have paused before the clue, you have more than 5 seconds to get the formula, so you don't need to feel rushed. Take your time and try to figure it out. This activity, I give you 3 hints, so if you get it without the extra clues, you can jump forward about 15 seconds in the video to continue on. Also, because this lesson is more of a conceptual idea than an actual formula, you'll notice the content has been a little bit shorter, but I've actually made the practice activity a little bit harder because I haven't directly taught you one of the tricks to make this actually work. But if you think about it, you'll probably be able to figure it out. So, your practice activity for today, complete the table on the practice tab using VLOOKUP and inline arrays so that you write the formula in B2 and can drag over and down to complete the table without making any adjustments to the VLOOKUP. Pause to practice. Did you get it? All right, let's look at our first clue. In order for you to be able to drag over and get a different result, the column you want to return has to change, not the index of the VLOOKUP. Pause to practice. How we doing? I know this one's tough. Next clue. This will look very similar to the formula we ended with in example 2, with one minor but critical change. Pause to practice. Last clue. Think back to the syntax basics lesson we did and when we should and shouldn't use a $sign in our references. Last time. Pause to practice. Did you get it? How'd you do? Let's go ahead and jump into our example and see how we did. The start of this is going to be very similar and look very familiar to the example 2 tab VLOOKUP we did. So we'll start with equals VLOOKUP $A2, so we don't want that search key to move. And now we're going to go ahead and open our curly brackets. And then in our Canvas export, we're going to go ahead and select column L. Now here's where a really critical change is going to happen. Remember, when we drag a formula over or copy it down to the next column, it will shift any columns that don't have the $sign in their formula over. So in this case, we don't want column L to move. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that that stays in place with those two $signs. And our first thing we wanted to return was the student name. So we're going to go to column B. Now this is that critical piece. Do not put the $signs on this column. Now we'll go ahead and close our curly Q brackets and then complete it like normal for the rest of our VLOOKUPs. And hit enter. Now we have their name. The start of this is going to look much like our example 2 formula VLOOKUP that we did. So we're going to say equals VLOOKUP $A2, comma, and then our opening curly Q brackets. Then Canvas export, tab 1, we're going to go to column L, select that. Now, here's one thing that's going to change. Here, we're going to add those $signs so that we lock in these columns. We don't want this column to move when we shift the formula over. Add our comma, and then the first thing we wanted was name. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start here. This isn't actually the complete formula, but I want to show you how this works before we finish out the actual full formula to the next step. So then the rest of this is going to be $2 and false, like before, following our normal format. So now I have that example right there. Now, when I drag this over and I fix the formatting, I now have the last login. The way that worked is it went from column B as the second column here, and because it's the only column that doesn't have $signs on it, when I copied it over, it shifted over a letter. So now it's column C, but that means it's still the second value in the VLOOKUP array. So my index never actually changes, but my result does. So that's the way this works. This gives us the ability to drag that formula over and copy that information and not have any problems. So But we didn't actually quite finish this because like we did last, we do need to repeat this for the other sheets because we've got kids coming from multiple classes. So we'll add that semicolon, and then we'll do the same thing on Canvas Export 2, column L. Press F4 to lock that one in, and then do it again with column B, then semicolon, and do it again with Canvas Export 3. Again, F4 to lock that in, and then the name column right here. Now we'll hit enter. We can drag this over real quick. Just have to fix our data types because some of these are not the way they should be because it assumes it's copying over. So we'll fix that real quick. And this actually should be a full date timestamp. And then now we'll copy this whole formula straight down. And there we go. We have all the data all organized in one formula that can be copied all the way across and all the way down. So there's that formula for you right there. Well, that concludes lesson 203. With this information in your repertoire, you are ready to take on the next level and really boost your skills in Sheets. As always, thank you for allowing me to show you how to take your Sheets game to the next level with my Sheets for School Leaders course. If you found this lesson helpful, check out bradscheffler.com for my full selection of courses. All 100 level courses are free, so try them out and see if they're for you. And if you do find value in them, consider sharing to your coworkers, friends, and that guy at the beach with a metal detector. Have a great day, and remember, the goal is to never do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. Welcome to lesson 204 of the Sheets for School Leaders course, where our goal is to make all of our data dynamic so we don't have to do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets. I'm your host and teacher, Brad Scheffler. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about one of the most important formulas we can use to really make our sheets dynamic, and that is the array formula. As usual, make sure you have a copy of the practice sheet for this lesson and follow along with the examples while you watch this video. The link can be found in the information section for this lesson. Before we get to the actual formulas for this lesson, we're going to talk about why we would use this formula. So let's go on over to our practice sheet and take a look. On example 1, we have a table of seniors with over a 3.0 GPA and how many visits they have each made to our resource center from a sign-up sheet we've used in the last couple lessons. If you look at cell A3, you'll see that it is created just using a filter formula, filtering out those that are seniors and that have greater than a 3.0 GPA. And if we go on over to our COUNTIF formula we have on number of visits, we're counting how many times that ID number appears in the form responses tab. Pretty straightforward. We've done things like this before. If we go all the way to the bottom, we see right here, we have all the way to the bottom, we copy that formula down and we're good to go. Now, let's imagine we set this table up. New responses come in, that count formula updates and modifies. If they come to the room another time, no big deal. But let's say the quarter ends, the semester ends, and now we need to update our student data that includes all of those ID numbers. So it includes those ID numbers, but also includes that GPA. Students finish classes, they do well, maybe their GPA goes up, maybe it goes down. So we usually do our usual update, file import. We're gonna upload that update version right here and go ahead and put that new version in. Now, when I go back to example 1, I'm going to see that my formula ends right here, but I have a bunch more people here. So I'd have to go in and go ahead and copy that formula the rest of the way down. And I have to do that every time I update my data. Every time I get new students, every time students withdraw, I maybe have to take out a line. I end up with this formula that I keep having to copy down and drag down every time I update my data. That's the kind of stuff we don't want to have to do again and again and again. So that is going to bring us to today's new formula, the array formula. The array formula is unique in that it isn't really a formula on its own. It's more of a wrapper that you put around another formula. What the array formula does is tell Sheets to run the embedded formula inside over and over and over again on the range you give it. I know, that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's go back to our practice sheet and see this in action to help make sense of it. On example 2, you'll see we have the same table here. Same table's ready to go. We just took out the number of visits column because that was the part that was causing us issues. So now we're going to convert that COUNTIF into an array formula. So we're going to do equals array formula, open parentheses, and now we're going to do that COUNTIF. COUNTIF, our range where we're going to count hasn't changed. It's over on form responses, and it's column B. Add a comma, and here's where the array formula gets good. We're going to do our range. So our range we want to do is this whole column, column A. So we're going to type A2 through A. That's going to tell it that I want to do this whole column all the way down. Close out both of those parentheses and hit enter. Now we have all the way down that formula being run. And if we update our number of students again, another semester passes by, we've got to update our list. We can update our list just like so. And you'll see that more people have been added, but my formula just kept on going with those new students. No copying and pasting again, no having to redo that formula as my data updates. That's always our goal, is not having to do the same thing twice. Let's go ahead and look at another example here. One thing to know about Google Forms is that when a new response goes into a Google form, on the connected Google Sheet, it inserts a new row onto that sheet. It doesn't add the data onto the next row, it just inserts an entire row. Here's what that means for us, is we can't preload our formulas into a response sheet. So for example, right here, the sheet we've been using, we've got our data right here, okay? And I preloaded this formula. I'm doing a quick lookup to see what the student's grade level is based on the ID number they enter. So now let's imagine that another student makes another submission. And see there, it added a new row. So that formula didn't copy over. So we got to have a way around that. So let's do an array formula to figure that out. So we're going to go ahead and delete that whole row real quick. We'll make grade. And then we're going to do our array formula, equals array formula. And we're going to do a VLOOKUP. So VLOOKUP. Here we're going to be looking up B2 through B. That's the range that we want the array formula to go through one at a time. Our range is over on all students. We can go ahead and just select all the way over to grade level, starting with the ID number and then go over to grade level. And then in this case, grade level is the 6th on the index. And we're going to go with false to get an exact match. Close out both parentheses and hit enter. All right, now we have that ID number right there, or that grade level right there, and it goes all the way down. If we have a new submission done on our form, that new submission comes in and automatically I get the grade level because the array formula is going to keep on going through that formula. The other thing that's really nice about the array formula is if we need to make an adjustment to a formula, we only have to do it once and the whole column will adjust. So for example, let's say we changed our mind and now we want this to return instead of the grade level, we now want it to return the last name, for example. That's the 3rd on the index from that VLOOKUP. We just hit enter. And now all the way down, I have last names for all of those students. If I wanted first names, I can change that to a 4. And boom, I have all the first names all the way down for all those students. Whenever we need to make adjustments to our formula, we only do it once and the whole column is updated immediately, which is really useful. There are a few really important considerations to keep in mind when you are using array formulas, some things that cause unique issues that you might need to keep in mind. One of those is that if there's any data in any of the cells where the array formula is trying to run, it will stop the array formula from working. It gets in the way, and so the array formula can't overwrite the data that's already there. It has to be able to say, oh, I can't put anything in this column, and it stops the whole formula from working. Let me show you what I mean. Over here, let's imagine we realize, oh, that's not actually right for some reason. We want to change this to just Martin is actually the right spelling, so we hit enter. Notice it completely broke that column. That whole column disappeared. And I have an error where my array formula is. If you hover your mouse over it, it'll tell you what's wrong. It says it's going to have an issue with the data there, and it's going to be on cell F13. So all we have to do is go to F13, delete that, and our column comes back. That's easy for you to understand. It does occasionally cause issues with people using your sheets if they don't know what they're doing. So always keep in mind, it's a good idea if you have an array formula in a column, protect that column so that it's locked in. We can right click, we can hit view more column options and hit protect range. We'll just set those permissions to be only me so that now anyone else using this form can't make adjustments to this. Only I can edit it and they won't run into those problems. Quick and easy to know. The other thing to keep in mind is when you are using array formulas and also filter unique, a lot of those other ones we're using right now, the sorting of columns will get a little weird. It will either not work at all or will cause weird issues. Let me show you what that looks like and explain why so you understand. If we go on over to example 2, you'll see that this is a filter formula that's giving me this list of ID numbers. So to test it, let's just go ahead and try to filter this, and we're going to sort it by the number of visits. Who has the most visits to the least visits? You'll see there that for a split second it looked like it worked, but then it disappeared. The reason is this table really doesn't have any actual data in it. It's actually just displaying the data from somewhere else. So instead, what we end up with, if we go down here, is it'll have taken the formula, which was all the way in 191, and it moved that all the way down to where it would have been in the row of sorting. But then because the formula moved, the whole table moves. And notice we're also not sorted in the correct order like we wanted. We didn't actually fix any of the problems. The best way around this, if you really want a solution, is you can use a different tab and you can use the sort formula, which we've talked about before. We can sort that way and it'll be sorted somewhere else. You just aren't able to sort it on the place where the unique is running or the filter or array formula are running. The last thing to know is there are some formulas that don't work inside of an array formula. One of the big ones is averaging. Averaging inside of an array formula doesn't work. Also the and or formulas that we've used if we're doing an if statement, those don't work inside there either. There's ways to work around them. You just have to know what they actually mean. So, average is the total value divided by the number of times that it occurs, easy. And an or also, we'll talk about later on ways to get around that limitation. Time for some practice. If you completed any of my other lessons, you will know how this works. I will give you a task to try and tell you to pause the video. After 5 seconds, I will give you a clue in case you are struggling. Again, since you will have paused before the clue, you have more than 5 seconds to get to the formula, so do not feel rushed. Take your time and try to figure it out without as many clues as you can. This activity, I'm going to give you 3 hints. So if you get it without the extra clues, you can jump forward about 15 or 20 seconds in the video to continue on. For the practice for this activity, you are going to complete the table on the practice tab by writing 2 array formulas, one of which will be dragged over to complete the 3rd blank column. Pause to practice. How are we doing? Did we catch it? All right, let's get our first clue. Average if doesn't work inside of an array formula. So if we have to calculate it manually, pause to practice. Did we get it yet? Well, how about another clue? Think back to our practice in the inline arrays lesson to write the formula for column C. Pause to practice. Not quite there? One more clue? All right. As is often the case with formulas being dragged from column to column, the presence and absence of the $ is what makes all the difference. Pause to practice. All right, time's up. How'd we do? All right, let's go to the answer. So, as I said, you can't do an average if inside of an array formula. That's what we would want to do if we could, but we can't. So instead, we've got to calculate that average manually. So an average is done by adding up the total values and dividing by the number of times it occurs. So let's start here with our array formula. And to get the total value, we're going to do a sum if, which does work inside of an array formula. Our range to look for criteria is over on form responses, and it's column B, because that's where the student ID numbers are. Add a comma here. And our range to run for the array formula, again, this is the range that's going to be repeated over and over again, is going to be A2 through A. And then we want our sum range, we're going to add another comma and select the total number of minutes in the room. Close that parentheses. Now we'll divide that out by the number of times that that value occurs. So we'll do a divided sign, / and we'll do count if. Our range to count is column B again from form responses, add a comma. And then our value, our criteria to look for is again A2 through A. Make sure that when you're using array formulas, the ranges that are running over and over are the same size. They need to be able to increment at the same time. So now we'll close out both parentheses and hit enter. There's our average length of visit. That's the easier one. Now the tougher one. So for the last name and first name, we're going to do a VLOOKUP contained inside of an array formula. But again, the criteria was we wanted to be able to drag that formula over, not have to change anything else to get last name and then first name. And this is really where the beauty of your array formula comes in. So let's write the first one. We're going to say equals array formula. We're going to do VLOOKUP. Our search key is what's going to be incremented, our range to run through the array formula, A2 and A. Now again, because we're going to drag, we always got to think about what we want to lock in. We don't want that to move, because if I copy my formula over a column to the right, it's going to change from the student ID column to search for to the visit length, and it's not going to find that in the other column. So we'll hit F4. That will add all the $ we need, and add a comma. Here we're going to do an inline array inside of a VLOOKUP inside of an array formula. We're putting all these things that we've learned together to start making very powerful formulas. So that inline array is going to start with those curly brackets. Open that up. Over on all students, we're going to go ahead and select a column with ID numbers. Again, think about what we do and don't want to move. When I drag this formula over, I don't want that to increment. So I'm going to hit F4 to add the $, add a comma. And then we want last name was the first one we're looking for, so we're going to put that right there. Now notice, next to last name, column D is column E is first name. So that D is what we do want to shift when we drag that formula over. So close the curly Q brackets, and then we finish this formula like we usually do with our VLOOKUPs, number 2 for our index, and false to get an exact match, and then close out both of those parentheses. Hit enter, and then I have last name. And then all I have to do is drag that right over, and I have first name for all those same students. You notice everything's the same except that column D became column E, and all I had to do was copy it over. Easy as can be. This is really where array formulas and all these things we've learned have started to come together to let us simply and easily adjust our formulas to be able to get all the data we need in one place without ever having to do the same thing twice with our data. Well, that concludes lesson 204. With this information in your repertoire, you are ready to take on the next level and really boost your skills in Google Sheets. As always, thank you for allowing me to show you how to take your Sheets game to the next level with my Sheets for School Leaders course. If you found this lesson helpful, check out bradschreffler.com for my full selection of courses. All 100 level courses are free, so try them out and see if they're for you. And if you do find value in them, consider sharing to your coworkers, friends, and your next food delivery driver. Have a great day, and remember, the goal is to never do the same thing twice with our spreadsheets.